So today I brought you down to our reserve at Close Sartfield, which is just about to burst into bloom, and I'm going to talk to you about flowers. Flowers, you think they are so pretty looking, but you know, they're just a trap to try and get insects to stay a bit longer and trick them to carrying pollen from one plant to the other. And if we just look over here, here's some of the stars of our show. Can you see the pink flowers down there? They are absolutely fantastic. So come on a flower journey with me. So today we're going to be talking about flowers. So before we start, what I wanted to do was just look at the different parts of a flower. So you can see the very big pink bits here. These are the petals. They have a very important job. They have to draw in the insects that are going to pollinate the plant. So often they're very bright and colourful. Often they have patterns on them. And sometimes this is where the scent will come from for the flower. Now, it has this massive part in the middle, but not all flowers will look like this, okay? Which is called the stigma and the style, okay? And round the outside here, we have stamens. And on the very top, you can see these funny little things called anthers. So what happens basically is we need pollen from the stamens to go onto the stigma and then travel down the pollen tube, and this is where the seeds for a new plant will start to grow. A flower does not want its own pollen to go onto itself, so it needs to somehow get that pollen to a completely different flower. Now that's a bit difficult if you're a plant because you can't move. So you have to use things that will do the movement for you. It could be either an insect coming in and moving that pollen, or it could be maybe wind pollination. So if you want to move that pollen by an insect, you need to get the insects in, and then you've got to try and stick the pollen onto the insect. So they've got lots and lots of different ways of attracting insects in. They have, right at the base of the flower, a little sweet reward for the insect for coming to that flower called nectar. It's a very sweet, sugary solution that they can drink from. The stigma, remember that bit in the middle, is sticky. So when the pollen is brushed past, when it's stuck onto the back of the insect, it will actually glue itself to the stigma. Pollen is sticky. It needs to stick to those insects' bodies. The petals are often brightly coloured and scented to attract insects. Okay, and they tuck the stamens right inside the flower. Now, if you want that pollen to transfer to a bee or an insect, you want to try and make it have to really work hard for it and really have to go inside that flower and walk around and get covered in that pollen. So there's a good chance of it being transferred. So pollen, it's microscopic, it's very, very tiny. So these pictures have been taken by a very high magnification microscope. And if you look on the outside of the pollen are lots of spikes, so it can attach itself to the insect. Sometimes you get these little comb-like structures, and all of it is designed so it's going to stick onto that insect and then be carried away to the next flower. Now we just said that flowers need to be really brightly coloured to attract the insects in. Well, you can see here this flower is white. It doesn't look bright colours. But here's the thing. Insects don't see things like we do. Their eyes are more susceptible to blues and greens, the ultraviolet range, which we can't actually pick up. So actually this flower here, though it looks white to us, to a bee would actually look blue. The other interesting thing, if we look at some more pictures of flowers, here we are, here's a lovely one. This shows you, we can see that flower is yellow. If we could pick up ultraviolet, just ultraviolet light, that's how we would see it. Not like that at all, but if our eyes could pick up ultraviolet, that's how we would see it. If you're a bee, you can see it in ultraviolet and greens and blues. So actually the flower looks like that, not that lovely yellow colour. And then birds again, they have a different colour range to us. So it's really interesting. What we see isn't necessarily what an insect would see. Here's another one. We all know this is a dandelion. But here's the incredible thing. It just looks like one yellow colour to us. But look, if you're an insect, you've got this darker red centre to it. And that's what's drawing the insects in towards the stigmas and the anthers so that it can get covered in pollen. It is such an incredible ploy by plants. So the first flower we're looking at is actually a Meadow Buttercup, and I'm sure you're all very, very familiar with this. So you can see the nice bright yellow petals. In fact, can you see that light shining off them? It's very, very reflective, almost like a mirror. And it's believed this reflection shines and attracts the insects in more into these flowers. So if we have a little look down the middle, there you can see quite clearly that yellow, they're all the stamens. Okay, and they'll be covered in pollen. Right in the middle will be the carpels. This hasn't opened up fully yet. I'm going to just turn it over so we can see the base of the flower there. Can you see if we try and get it to refocus? There, can you see the sepals? They're the very, very light yellow little bits tucked underneath the petals. This shows us that this is a Meadow Buttercup. And if we look a little bit further down here, there, can you see that leaf right in the middle of the screen? That's a very typical leaf. They're almost triangular shaped and very deep lobe. That means lots and lots of cuts to them. So we come back up and have a look at the flower. I'm just going to run my finger on it and see if I can brush any pollen off on my finger. No, that didn't work. Sometimes when you brush these flowers, what happens is you get like a yellow powder on your fingers. There, I think you can just about make out a little bit there. Okay, so that really reflective flower is how we played the do you like butter or not game as a child, because it does reflect the light back up. Now buttercups belong to the genus called Ranunculus, okay, and it actually comes from the Latin rana, which means little frog, and that's because these mainly grow in damp areas. And this beautiful, beautiful flower here on our Close Sartfield Reserve is what we're so famous for here, is our orchids. Okay, and this one is a common spotted orchid. Now, when you see that, you might think that refers to the marks on the leaves, but if we look down here, and I very gently try and pull the leaf, which has been a bit awkward, there. Can you see the leaf on it, which looks like a blade of grass, actually has spots on. That's why it gets its name like it does. So if we look back up, if you look, it's actually a spike of flowers. Okay, so it's got quite a few in. And if we look at the bottom of the flowers, those three lips are the same length. And I'm just going to go through here, because here's another absolutely stunning one. Just here, just look at those lovely marks on it, okay? Remember, all those marks are designed for insects to go in. Now, they don't produce nectar. They just fool the insects to come in and pollinate them. And there are literally loads and loads and loads of them around if we just look. Okay, another one over there. You can just see how beautiful and stunning is that. And whilst we take in the sight of these beautiful orchids in this meadow, I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about orchids. The fertilisation, that means the pollen transferring onto the stigma and then producing seeds, was actually studied by Charles Darwin in 1862. And he realised that these orchids needed their pollen to go from one flower to the other to be able to mix the genes so they had stronger and better plants. Now, they are absolutely amazing, fascinating plants. Some orchids can live to be 100 years old. Obviously our ones don't. But to get them kick-started, most seeds have the energy inside them, okay? But with an orchid, it doesn't. It actually needs a symbiotic relationship with fungus to get it started. Very, very weird, but there's a lot we don't understand about them. I'm going to show you two different sorts of orchids now. So orchids can be very specialised in the sort of insects they want to pollinate them. So it means that orchids often are long-lived because there's less chance of that insect coming along, so they need to have a longer life. So the one that we're looking at now is called a bee orchid. I have seen some on the island. I've not seen them at Close Sartfield, but they've got this lovely what we call bilateral symmetry. So if I were to fold the paper in half here, okay, and then just printed it on top of itself, it'd be exactly the same image. So this bee orchid is called a bee orchid because it's trying to imitate a female bee. It's trying to draw the male in to land on this part here, which is supposed to be the body shape of the female. And it also emits a scent that is just like a female. This very strange looking orchid, which we don't have, is called lady's slipper orchid, and it needs a special type of bee to pollinate it. Now if it's too big a bee, it just lands in there, can't find any nectar, off it goes. But if it's small enough, when it lands, it actually slips down this slope here, and it's a very slippy bowl that it falls into. Now at the back of the flower, almost like two little windows of light. So of course the bee then crawls towards that light and it's forced down a little tunnel. As it does that, it takes the pollen from the flower and spreads it onto the stigma because it's being forced down that little corridor. Pretty cunning design, isn't that? So we always think of flowers as those big, open cup shapes. But you know, there's some flowers like this which are very tubular in form. Now, if you're an insect, to get to that nectar, you need to be able to stick your tongue in there. Now imagine the insect is really quite small. It's probably about the size of my thumbnail. Do you think its tongue would be long enough to get down to the nectar? So honeysuckle is actually pollinated by moths and long-tongued bees. It's pretty stunning though, isn't it? These ones haven't been pollinated because they're still that very light, creamy yellow colour. When they've been pollinated, they tend to go more of an orangey, reddy colour. So this is another very cunning plant. You probably recognise this as a foxglove. And what I'm going to do is try and get right in so we can have a close look inside that flower. See if I can get it to focus there. Can you see those lovely patterns? They're obviously leading the bee in. I don't know if you can see, you might just be able to make out that it's also very, very hairy inside this flower. And actually, it's a bit like the rungs of a ladder. They're there as stepping stones for the bees. Now, can you see that's quite a long way back, isn't it, to get to the nectar, which is right at the top end here where my finger is. But as they're rummaging around in there, look, there, how fantastic is that? Can you see those two bright yellow anthers coming down? So as the bee is wriggling around, it actually forces those pollen-filled anthers down onto the back of the bee. That pollen then sticks onto the bee, off it buzzes, onto the next flower and takes that pollen with it. So I'm showing you some pictures of the two most common orchids that you'll find on our Close Sartfield Reserve at this time of year. So we have the Heath spotted orchid and the common spotted orchid, and they are very, very tricky to tell apart. Our reserves manager, Tricia Sale, does a fantastic job managing the reserve for these beautiful, beautiful flowers. And she's very good at identifying the difference. She does the most fantastic orchid walks. Now,
Unfortunately, this year with coronavirus, it's going to be a bit trickier to do these walks. So there will still be open, the reserve will still be open for you to be able to walk around and look at the orchids, but there won't be a guided walk this time. The time when this is available will be put up on our Facebook page, so please do keep an eye on it. They are a stunning sight. So I'm showing you the photographs because this shows you the difference between these two orchids. It's very hard to tell the difference, especially what happens is we get cross-pollination between them. So that means the bee might visit a common spotted orchid and then go to a heath spotted orchid, and then the seed will produce what we call a hybrid plant, a sort of mixture between the two. So it gets more and more complicated. Tricia is very good at telling the difference. So the first one we're looking at is called the common spotted orchid. It's usually a pale pink colour to purplish. And if you look, with orchids, it's always this lower lip on the flower that tells you the difference. And with a common spotted orchid, they're the same equal length. And the other thing, can you remember when we were looking on the earlier video, when we looked down at the leaves actually have the spots on, and that's why it's called a spotted orchid. And the spots on the leaves of the common spotted tend to be more sort of like a blotch, more like a smear rather than a circular spot. Okay, so we'll just have a look at the one underneath. This one is called the heath spotted orchid. It blooms earlier, slightly earlier than the common spotted orchid, though Tricia said this can vary from year to year and it's not particularly clear on our reserve. They can be white or a light pink colour. Just like the common spotted orchid, they also have spots on their leaves, but their spots tend to be a little bit more rounded. Just like the common spotted, the lip on the flower, the lower petal, has 3 equal lobe lengths in it, but the notches here are much shallower than on the common spotted. It is very tricky and it takes a long time to be able to spot the difference between these two. So this is quite a nice little bit to be doing. You're going to become an orchid designer. Now you can download from our website this sheet here. And can you remember we were talking about bilateral symmetry? So that it's the same image on both sides of like the fold. So what we're going to do, we're going to actually paint our own orchids and then print the other side so it's completely symmetrical. So the top one we've got is one of the orchids that we had a look at on the video, which is a bee orchid. And the other one is a common spotted orchid. So I've got my paints ready, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to challenge myself because I want to get that bee into my bee orchid. So I'm going to, with this one, it's the lower, what we call lip, the lower petal that's going to look like the bee. So I'm just painting very quickly because I want the paint to still be wet so I get that lovely print, and I'm going to make it look as much like a bee as I can. So I'm going to paint bee stripes on it, and I painted what looks almost like antennae as well. And I'm going to use a brown paint for the stripes on my bee. Okay, and I'm also going to use a yellow paint because I want my flower to be really bright and attract the bees in. And I'm going to use red paint, and I'm going to use like guiding lines to get my bees to come right into my flower. So there you are, I've painted it. I'm going to very quickly, before that paint dries, fold over along that line, tricky that bit, squash the paint, open it up. There you are, mine's one, you need to work very quickly because it does dry very quickly, the watercolour paints, but you can see that I've got that lovely bee's body. So my next challenge is the common spotted orchid. So I'll let you do that. So here's the next challenge. Now, can you remember in the video I said about plants are very cunning because they want the insect to really work hard and have to stay a long time on the flower so they can put pollen on it. So here's just a flower outline sheet. So you'll need to cut it out, and I've actually cut a hole in the middle because one of the things I want to do with this one is I want to make a long tube, a bit like the honeysuckle that we saw in the video. So I just cut the bottom of the sheet off actually, little rectangle, and I'm going to roll it up. I'm just going to put some glue on one end, so when I've rolled it up, it will stick in that tube. Oops, that thing's not working very well. So I'm going to go get another glue. There we go, we'll try this one. Here we go. There we go. And just like that, I want to roll it up, but I want to get it sort of the same width as this because I want them to go down inside that tube. So I'm trying to roll that. There we go, there's my glue bit. That should stick it now. There. So hopefully, there's my flower. That's the tube that they've got to go down. I'm going to attach my tube. If I make just some little cuts on it, like this. Okay. And then I'm just going to flatten out those cuts. Okay. I just need another one there. That's a bit of a big flower. Okay, and this will help stick my tube onto my flower. So, can you see? Just made some little flaps. And I'm going to put my glue on my flower. There we go. I'm doing mine really quickly, but you can take your time. Make your flower nice and bright. Put some of those nice guiding lines in for the insects. And I know we talked about bees just seeing sort of like ultraviolet range, but just think of it like we would see it as yellow. So colour any colour you like. Don't worry about it having to be blue or anything. So there we go. It's getting really good now. Look at this. So the insect has got to go down this long tube to get to the nectar. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to squish that bit in. Okay. Because not only does it have to crawl down to get the nectar, but it also then has to crawl out. So that's quite a cunning little disguise. And I'm going to make this a little bit hairy on here. Now, you could cut out little hairs, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make some little snips like this in my petals. Like this, can you see? I'm just, be careful of your fingers with this one, okay? Here we go. And another one here. There is actually a wonderful, really hairy plant that grows in the crest called bog bean, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's a super hairy looking plant, and it's such a cunning ploy this, because the longer you get that insect wandering around on you, the more chance you've got of getting on it. So I've just snipped on these, and I'm just going to curl these up a bit. Can you see? Okay, so these are going to be my, oops, it's a bit gluey, that one. My hair's sticking up on my flower, and I'll show you in a minute from the side. Okay, so just, like I said, you can stick these on. You could even maybe get like furry fabric or something to stick on. So there you go. Can you see my hair sticking up? So now when the bee comes along, sees a nice bright colour, lands, might have little guiding lines on that plant. Oh, can't walk straight there, has to walk around. There's more chance of it getting nectar on it. Walks around for a little bit, and then in down the tube to get the nectar, gets covered in pollen. See how cunning a plant you can make.